chug, 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 chug,
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Wizard Staff Podcast. I'm your host, Blake.
And I'm Guy.
And we are two drunk novices who like to talk about EDH. We do drink and swear, so you've been warned. Please drink responsibly when playing children's card games. Well, it's been a little bit of a hot minute since we've recorded an episode. Guy and I have been taking a little bit of a break, and I think it's been nice. It's been kind of a rest, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, a lot has happened. We'll definitely be covering a lot of it in our quarter 4 review, but at the same time, I mean, we'll just get into it now. Unfinity and Warhammer 40k, two completely different sets that we've seen before, and, you know, personally not the most interesting to us. I also feel like kind of, you know, gave us a good break from the hype of spoiler season and needing to keep up with everything as well.
Yeah, and I mean, this is also part of our new episode structure where we're trying to cover more things in our quarterly announcement episodes so that we can kind of take breaks like this where we don't feel like every single episode is a set review. Like, as fun as that is, we don't want to get burnt out. So, now we have returned, and yeah, we're going to talk about some stuff. Maybe the Magic community has, like, already moved on from these topics, and now they're talking about Brothers' War, but we're going to take a second and kind of give our thoughts on Unfinity and Warhammer 40k, and what they represent in the Commander format and the tabletop community in general, I'd say.
Yeah, I'd say that's a pretty good breakdown of what we're doing tonight. These aren't set reviews that we're doing for these two sets that came out. I think one card in specific gets mentioned throughout the whole episode, but yeah,
I think that's true. Yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, this is not a set review. This is us like talking holistically about these sets, and there's been mixed emotions about these sets, and I wanted to do this episode because I honestly wasn't quite sure how I felt about them. You know, an online discourse, it seems like whoever you talk to, they are very certain as to what they think and feel. And I wanted to honestly just admit that I'm not entirely sure how I feel. I want to research this and find out as much as I can on the topic and see if I've come to any conclusions, and even if I do come to some conclusions, I might find something else out in the future and change my opinion again. I really just wanted to like have a discussion, honestly catch up with my best friend.
Aw, that's cute.
But before we get into all of that, do we want to talk about what we were drinking tonight? Or maybe not drinking?
Well, I'm drinking, and so I believe this is what I drank on the last episode, because it's been a while, but I had about half a bottle of my cheapest grills. It's got sheep on the front cover, and it's like a play on words. So I started pouring a glass, and I was like, you know what? Let's just see how much can actually like fit into this glass. And I poured half a bottle into my one glass, and it filled up right to the rim. And I was like, excellent. That's all I'll be drinking tonight.
Alright, I do remember you drinking that last time, so...
Okay, okay.
I do remember that.
What are you drinking?
I decided to try something a bit new. So, this can had a bunch of, like, really cool... I don't want to say foiling, but, like, the... like, sticker on it has this cool... It does look foiled, like, mantis shrimp. It's very colorful. It's got all the colors of the rainbow, basically. So, I'm just like... this looks cool. So it's like a West Coast Pale Ale that's 4.9 ABV. And I think it's by Great Nation Brewing and Barrel House. And then they're located in Portland, Oregon. So it tastes pretty darn good. It's the Thumb Splitter, which is why I think the little mascot for this beer is a mantis shrimp, because those little suckers can punch the hell out of fucking anything. They're cute.
Okay. Nice.
Tastes good. So I'm liking it. Comes in a 4-pack. All right. So do we want to start getting
all 4 of them, right?
I gave one to my dad, so I'll drink the other 3.
Okay. All right. So let's just dive right into it. So, Unfinity Warhammer 40k decks. Yeah. To what you said, Blake, these are a little decisive in the Magic community. Unfinity is the first black-bordered unset and introduces the ever so popular acorn stamp and the even more popular stickers. And then the Warhammer 40k set, or the Warhammer 40k decks, are our real first big dive into Universes Beyond. I know we've had sets like that before, but I'd say this is our real set dedicated fully to Warhammer 40k, not just like Secret Lair stuff. And I mean, I've been on the fence. I know you've been on the fence about both of these since they are very untraditional as to what we've seen before, but they were both released on the same day, which is a lot to take in at once.
It was. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah. And I mean, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but since it is a lot to take in all at once, and we already have so many products released during the year, 2 of these really untraditional sets being released at the same time just feels like a lot. And I think that's also kind of part of the community's kind of undecisive or resentment towards them, I guess. Or, I don't know if resentment's necessarily the right word, but, you know, it's just a lot all at once. And I think what I like about us talking about this now is we've had almost 2 months, I think, to kind of digest this and, like, you know, get to see how it's actually played out. And I think that's good because, you know, we're looking at this not necessarily with, like, fresh eyes, and we're worried about what could be, because now we have seen kind of what has happened, I guess.
What are you talking about, Guy? It's been 2 months and Magic is dead. Even though they're still releasing cards and people are still buying the cards, Magic is dead and in the ground.
Magic died in 1995, so I don't know what you're talking about. Something in 1995, the year after it was released, people were like, oh yeah, Magic's dead. It's over.
Dude, they printed Black Lotus. The game is over. Doesn't matter if that was one of the first cards ever printed. The game's over. It's done.
Yeah, that actually probably was what killed Magic.
Yeah. Alright. So, how about we dive into, like, the backgrounds on each of these sets and just kind of, like, set the stage for everyone who's, like, maybe not in the current mind space of what we're talking about.
Yeah, why don't you lead us on what is Unfinity?
Sure. So, Unfinity was a top-down design, very different to other previous unsets. You know, Morrow, aka Mark Rosewater, wanted to do a circus-themed set, but was told the tone was wrong for a normal set. So, like, the designers needed to keep expanding into, like, the amusement park tropes and carnival tropes in order to, like, round out a full set. And they were like, alright, let's just make it, like, silver border, and let's, like, make it Unfinity, like, similar to Unstable and other silver border sets. That's what we're gonna go with. And so that was the initial design of this set. And then it took a number of years to make silver border sets. I think that's something I needed to remind myself, was that unlike other sets where they just churn them out on a regular basis, like, silver border sets often take many years to make. So that's something I had to remind myself.
Yeah, I think the last full unset released was probably around the time when I actually started first playing Magic, because I know that the cards were legal in Commander for that short period of time. I forget what that unset was called, but yeah, that was almost 5 years ago.
A little quick side note, I've been told that the artists who illustrated for this set had an awesome time, and I can kind of see why. Like, if you're an illustrator, it's kind of nice to do something unconventional and really test your creative skills, I imagine. Guy, can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at... I guess, like, it is cool with each Magic plane that there is certainly a feel to each one. Like, Ixalan is certainly much more different than, like, Omniket, for example. But they still each have this, like, Magic kind of, like, tie into them. Whereas Unfinity does have, like, a Magic-ish tie-in, but at the same time, it is a carnival in space, which is just so different than anything we've seen before. So I can imagine, like, just getting these prompts to draw these cards would be really cool.
Yeah, and to continue on about Unfinity, like, unsets in general have, like, always been thought of as pretty advanced design, like, the testing waters for future, like, design space. So it's always kind of been thought of, well, like, we'll do this in Silver Border, and then maybe one day this design will be brought into Black Border. And that happened with, like, for example, rolling dice. Recently, rolling dice was in Adventures of the Forgotten Realm, and we've gotten them here and there. So that's one example. So just kind of keep that in mind. Unsets are very far on the casual side of the competitive casual scale, and they see a high level of variance as a plus. So, like, as a competitive player, you don't want a lot of high variance, so therefore you don't really want a lot of these unset designs. But in more casual formats, like Commander, generally the player base is more accepting of these high variance cards and these wacky, like, out of left field designs, for lack of a better term. So I will say this, like, and this is kind of a point that's brought up, where if you're ever going to make these wild, zany cards, if any format's ever going to accept them, it's going to be the most casual of any format, and it can be argued that Commander is that format. Commander is more casual, generally speaking, than Modern, or Legacy, or Vintage, or any other format that I can think of off the top of my head. Unless you can think of other formats.
Oh, sorry. No, I can't think of any other formats. I thought you were, like, trying to cue me in, and I was like, I don't know. Like,
it's fine, because Commander is, like, the main format anyone plays anyway.
Right.
So, like, Morrow kind of was mentioning something that I kind of forgot about, and so I'll just quote it. So he said, "This made me think back and rethink what exactly unsets were supposed to be. When the idea of Silver Border was first conceived, there weren't a lot of supported formats. There was Type 1, Vintage, and Type 2, Standard, plus Type 1.5, Legacy, which was Type 1 with its restricted cards banned. So, everything that wasn't one of these formats was considered casual. When Silver Border was dubbed, quote, not for tournament play, end quote, that meant not for Vintage, Legacy, or Standard, but every other format, especially the casual ones. Over the years, Silver Border slowly shifted to end up meaning not for an official tournament, casual or not, which flies in the face of what it was originally intended to do, and that's Morrow saying that. And I kind of get what he's saying there. Like, Silver Border had a certain intention about it, and I think over time the narratives have kind of twisted, and Silver Border cards were always meant for casual formats, and on one hand I agree, and on the other hand, I don't want to play against cards like Space Bellerin. I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself, but I wanted to say that.
The part, I guess, that because I do know, I've heard him say this, Morrow. I can't quite pinpoint the exact Drive to Work episode because there are so many, but he has said something along the lines of, unsets are what was kind of intended for Magic to be. That was like Richard Garfield's vision. So I feel like in the beginning they should have just made a black border, and they were just like casual, fun, goofy cards. Like, they wouldn't be used in the competitive scene, but they could still be used in like a, I don't know, like standard or I guess Commander, now that exists, type format, kitchen table. I feel like it's just like they looked so different that's what like caused them to be ostracized from the Magic community as like a legitimate Magic card. But that was always their intention.
Yeah, which is something I hadn't really thought of until like I was researching it. So that kind of gave me a shift in perspective. I mentioned earlier that silver border sets took a number of years to make, and that also shifted my perspective. The design team made all of these Unfinity cards originally silver border, and then they determined about half of them could be black border cards given the changes in Magic over the years that the set was designed. So that also was a huge thing for me to realize, they originally intended it to all be silver border, but they realized that through the march of time and certain designs fitting within black border, that some of them, like half the card was like tournament legal and the other half wasn't. And so that, I think, was a huge shift for me in understanding where this set like originated from and why the end product is the way that it was. Because to be crystal clear, half of Unfinity is tournament legal and the other half of the set is not. And so that's where a lot of this tension has come from.
That makes sense. I feel like, part of it too is like, I guess if all cards didn't have, let's say like we just abandoned the Acorn and silver border altogether, made everything black border, you just have a few silly cards. Like, I don't know, trying to think of one that people might like Killer Cosplay, I guess. Like, it's a little silly, but it obviously wouldn't see Legacy, Vintage kind of play. Like, it would just be like a fun, casual Magic card.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about the positives and negatives for each of these products, but right now we're trying to stick with the background. We're trying to. Guy, do you want to talk about Warhammer 40k cards and their background of those cards?
Sure. So there were two goals that were in conflict when trying to create the creature types on Warhammer 40k cards. The first being that in order to express Warhammer 40k's unique world building through the medium of Magic cards, you need to like introduce creature types that are kind of like not unique to Magic. Tyranids are, I guess, like probably the biggest example that I can think of, just because I know there was a whole deck built around them.
Yep.
But they still needed to have like Magic feel. And then the other thing is also to integrate the new cards into Magic's deck building and gameplay ecosystem, making them desirable for Magic players, not just like 40k players who are going to be coming into Magic, but for established Magic players, I guess, for them to want to collect these cards. Now, at the time of the release for 40k, we have had several other Universes Beyond released. I think Walking Dead was the official first release. Stranger Things, Street Fighter, Fortnite, Dracula, Godzilla. We've had all those before.
Mm-hmm.
But Warhammer is the first full set. Like, we had 4 full commander decks, each with about 42 new cards per deck. And to put that in retrospect, most new commander decks we get nowadays maybe like 10 to 12 cards, maybe 15 at most. The thing about that too is like, I mean, we've come a long way for those decks to like just have like a ton of new cards, and so they really like dived in and made a lot of new cards for this set. So looking at Warhammer 40k and Unfinity, I think there are two things that they are trying to do for Magic the Gathering specifically. Mm-hmm. One is expand the tone, so whether that is a space amusement park for aliens or an alien invasion massacre, which is how I envision Warhammer 40k for the most part. These are just two typical settings we would not see in normal Magic the Gathering. Kind of like I said, like we have sets like Ixalan, Amonkhet that have like, you know, different planes that are grounded in Magic the Gathering lore, but then you also have like now these other kind of sets that are like, but what if you did this? So we're expanding the tone that way, and by expanding the tone, we are also expanding the audience in Magic the Gathering. So Warhammer 40k players who have never played Magic, you know, they hear, hey, Magic the Gathering just made these 4 decks. I love this game, 40k. Maybe this will get me into Magic. Especially Commander, being the decks that they were built for, because it's kind of what I imagine 40k is kind of like when playing. And then also, for the kind of people who are at the kitchen table, and maybe play with unset type cards in their normal games of Magic, because it's kitchen table, it doesn't matter. It now also gives them reason to want to buy a set that they've kind of been enfranchised with Unglue, Unstable, and can now use in like their Commander decks that are like untyped cards.
Right, it's all about trying to reach a wider audience, aka more customers to buy the card game, more a growth to the Magic community, and in theory a growth to whatever the non-Magic IP is. You know, just crossing cultures. Generally considered a good thing. And I do want to clarify, like, this isn't speculation. Like, I remember going to Command Fest Bellevue a couple months ago, and Gavin Verhey expressed, like, that was the goal. It was expanding Magic's tonal range to do exactly what we're talking about. So it is confirmed. Yeah. Like, that's one of the main goals.
Yeah, so I feel like both of these sets objectively did accomplish their goals.
Oh yeah, you got Unfinity reaching. Now that's not to say
that there wasn't issues with each of them, which we're going to get into here in a sec. But I think both sets did accomplish their goals, and you know, doing this on occasion, I don't think is necessarily going to be bad for the health of Magic the Gathering.
Yeah, let's like totally get into it. Let's start talking about the good stuff. Let's start talking about the issue of each set.
Start grilling them.
Putting them into the fire. Alright. Yeah, so like, we'll talk about the issues of each set, and then we'll talk about the upsides of each set, because we want to try to see the holistic side of things. So let's start with Unfinity. So one of the major concerns about Unfinity are these sticker cards, right? Like, on the surface level, sticker cards seem pretty cool, but there's concern as to whether their stickiness is going to damage the card. Like, and immediately upon release of stickers, Morrow clarified that this glue was not going to harm your physical cards, that it was the same consistency as, say, a postage stamp, and was trying to quell any concerns immediately from the release of this information. And so it's been a bit of time now. I haven't heard online anyone saying that they put stickers on a card and then you try and peel the sticker off and it just destroyed your $1,000 or $200 Magic card. I haven't heard any stories like that. And I think part of that is because, you know, most people who play with unsleeved cards generally are super chill people who, like, even if that is happening, theoretically, they aren't really taking to the internet and posting about it. Or they are people who sleeve up their cards, maybe even double sleeve them, or heck, even triple sleeve them. And the stickers are not causing a problem when being taken off of those sleeves. So that's good. That's a good thing, right? But I'm still kind of concerned, like, alright, you leave a sticker on your, like, card, your sleeved up card, and you forget about it. What is this material going to do in X number of years, say like 3 or 5 or 10 years, theoretically? You just forget about them and then you open them. Like, is this adhesive going to ruin the card? We don't know. We aren't going to know until the future. So maybe the designer, like the production company of this glue knows, but it's not been, like, publicly said. So that's kind of a nitty-gritty thing, but I still wanted to address it. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting because you're bringing up, like, the physical attributes that you're kind of concerned with. My concern was more so, from what I've seen, that people are like, stickers, that's a little silly in the terms of, like, it's a mechanic that is,
dexterity?
I don't know. Yeah. They're just like, well, how do I say this? Like, it just feels childish, I guess. And it doesn't belong in an actual game of Magic. Which I think, and so that being, that's what I've heard. I'm not trying to say that that's necessarily my opinion about it. Because, yeah, so that, I think, you know, it's both, one, a functional standpoint of, you know, will this adhesive work for how long, however long, like, forever? Like, you know, I don't think sticky notes necessarily last forever themselves, but the other thing too is, like, yeah, is this meant to be, like, for a real game of Magic? Like, people are just, and I know the mechanic itself is really confusing, so I know that that's just kind of, like, put people off from it. I actually have 10 sticker cards with me right now, and I just...
Oh, you do?
Yes, I bought a bunch, because I have the one goblin card that, like, adds mana depending on each vowel.
Blank goblin? Or mind goblin?
Yeah, well, mind goblin, these nuts. That's the joke.
God damn it.
But...
Fuck. You got me. I somehow missed that joke over all this time.
Oh my god, okay. Well, anyway, so, like, I have a bunch because of that card. Because it's, like, in consideration for my deck. For a deck, like. But
because it's weaker dockside.
The cards, they feel very odd. Like, this is just kind of like a side note. Like, they feel... Like, the texture of them just feels so much different than a normal Magic card. It's, like, surreal. Just to, like, finally be able to, like, touch them in person. Because I was going to test, like, how is the adhesive, and, like, put it on a card. But I don't. Yeah, it's just interesting. So yeah,
it's a good thing we're not trying to cheat in any tournaments, I guess.
Good thing. But okay, so stickers, decisive in the way that, one, will this damage our cards? The mechanic itself is very confusing. The other thing too is just, like, gameplay ability. Like, I know at the time that they probably designed the mechanic, you know, they couldn't quite anticipate COVID.
Right.
Because now it's like, okay, seeing that over a webcam is a little difficult. But, you know, Magic sets are made 3 to 4 years in advance, and also, you know, we're saying Unfinity probably took them a long time to make in general. So it does seem like stickers themselves were probably made in mind, like, way before any of that would have been, like, a concern in terms of, like, gameplay over camera or stuff like that, which is now how a lot of people play Magic.
Right. So the next issue, I would say, was that Unfinity is half Eternal format legal, and the other half is not, and that it really confused people, right? It's very jarring. All the previous unsets have been silver border, indicating that they are not tournament legal. So for Unfinity to come out and change the border, and instead of having the border indicate format legality, it's this tiny hollow foil sticker at the bottom center of the card. So a lot of people were just confused. It's different, and kind of what you were saying, at least not only over webcam is it visually hard to distinguish between those hollow foil stamps, but also just in person. Even if you are playing these cards and they're in your hand just like a foot away from your face, it's still like you have to spend energy to distinguish their format legality. Whereas with silver border and arguably like gold border, it's much more visually striking and much more visually apparent. So that's where there was a lot of contention.
Yeah. We talked shortly before the episode, but I also feel like they could have expanded really into what they've done before too, with like making cards pop out of the artwork frame. Since normally that's only reserved for like planeswalkers a little bit, but I think that would have helped quite a bit with like the visual indication of like this is not a, I don't want to say, well, how would I say this? This would be a untyped card, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I will say that as spoilers for this set were coming out, every day it was like I would read a card and then I'd be like, holy shit, this is busted. And I'd look down and be like, oh, thank God it's not Commander legal. Or the opposite, where you'd be reading a card like, oh my God, this is insane. Oh my God, this is also Commander legal? I'm mad. So it was, or you'd like read a card, forget about it, and then like you hear through online like, oh, that wasn't actually like your like eternal format legal. And then you like, wait, what? You're confused, and you go back, and then you're like, oh my gosh, you're right. Like there was just a lot of confusion, and it was very stressful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, so next issue that you definitely brought to mind, Blake, based on what you've kind of heard, but just the production of doing silver border versus black border.
Mm-hmm.
We're under the impression that silver border sheets are more expensive, so making all of these cards like black border and just adding the acorn stamp to indicate the like uncards is just better for them economically. But I guess like an issue with that, again, back to kind of just like, you know, they really should have tried to just emphasize more on like this is an untyped card. Like I don't think the my goodness, I'm not good with words. The means justified the end in that kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
Like it just created a really decisive set. Like I don't know, they were just kind of like, fuck it, like let's do it now. But yeah, I mean, again, like I feel like they should have just always stuck to the black border and try to make the cards look a little goofier.
Mm-hmm.
Help indicate that, but it is what it is. So I guess like change is always kind of scary the first time it happens. So if they do more unsets and they do them in more black border means, then like, you know, I feel like the outcry is not going to be nearly as loud as it is this first time.
Yeah, I agree. If they do something similar in the future, where a set is partially eternal format legal, and then partially the set is not, the audience, like us players, will be more receptive to it because Unfinity has come out and it's now set a different bar. So I agree with that. And to clarify earlier, you know, they designed Unfinity with the idea that it would be all silver border. Then they realized half the set could be black border given all the changes in Magic over the years. And so now they're kind of in a pickle because, as I understand, you can't print sheets of Magic cards where half of it is black border and half of it is silver border, as I understand. So they pretty much were kind of considering how Universes Beyond is now a thing within Magic design. So they were like, all right, let's just make it all black border. And in order to create format legality distinction, we're instead going to make the holofoil stamp in the center bottom of each card the indicator. And so that's now what they've moved towards. So we'll see. It's still a little bit contentious for me.
Yeah.
Anyway, there were some legal cards that are Commander legal, and some people have some real concerns about, including myself, i.e. Space Belleran. Talk about this card because it upsets me, guy.
I really wanted to build a Just Sky Super Friends deck so I could run
swear
this card.
To God.
And the other Planeswalker in the set, which was the dog. Because I was like, wow, this would be so much fun. Because it would piss so many people off.
Guy.
I don't think I would, though. I don't think I would in the sense of, like, it being a full deck that I would play all the time. But, like, it could be fun on occasion.
Yeah. Can I read it real quick?
Yeah, read Space Belleran.
Alright, so Space Belleran is 2 white and blue. It's a legendary planeswalker, and it's Jace, alright? It's your good old boy Jace. He comes in with 3 loyalty, so a 4 mana, 3 loyalty planeswalker. Seems alright. Then it has a static ability called Space Sculptor. And the rules text says, Space Belleran divides the battlefield into alpha, beta, and gamma sectors. If a creature isn't assigned to a sector, its controller assigns one to it. Opponents assign first. So let me read the abilities. +1. Creatures in each sector can be blocked this turn only by creatures in the same sector. -1. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature in the sector of your choice. -5. Destroy all creatures in the sector of your choice. So, for me, and a lot of players, the main issue is that this is a high dexterity card, where you're pretty much dividing up the battlefield, or the board space, whatever you want to call it, into like physical different locations, and it's just a design because of actual physicality and dexterity of this card that's required, that's actually a nightmare. It gives me flashbacks to like Warp World and Chaos-esque shit like that I do not want to play. It's the kind of design for ultra casual players, and I hope they have fun with this card, but for me, most nights, on an average night, I don't want to play against this. I will probably ask if they're going to win next turn, and then if they don't plan to, I'm going to be honest and tell them I don't want to play against this card, and I'm probably going to scoop up and just go about my life, because this is not the kind of design that I want to play against. Hopefully we had a pregame discussion to avoid this very situation, but I don't want to play against this card. I'm just gonna say that.
Alright, so I'm definitely building this Jeskai deck now.
Fuck
You're gonna surrender every time.
Get out of here.
I'll finally get a win after so long.
You win against us.
I would like you to name the last time I did. But that's besides the point. My losing streak isn't important, for as much as I play Commander. But yeah, I mean, I guess, like, I'm kind of curious as to, like, how they, like, determined that this card was black border. Like, it does seem really simple of a concept, but also a lot of other cards I feel like are simple enough for me to understand that they could be black border. So yeah, just in terms of, like, a rules perspective, it's odd that, I guess, like, this made it into black border, or I guess, like, oval stamp, we'll call it, versus the acorn stamp. Yeah, I can definitely see some headaches with this card, just in general. And if it is oval stamped, then it does encourage people to want to play with it. And I guess, like, speaking to this, just in terms of a moving on to the next point, but like webcam commander games, so the small stickers, that's a nightmare. You play Space Bell Run, that's going to be a nightmare, because like how are we going to keep track of that over webcam? That's just going to be difficult. I feel like Unfinity has introduced a couple things where it does make it difficult for you to track as a player, and if you are playing with these types of cards, please come prepared to like be able to like at least try and help your play group distinguish between them.
Mm-hmm.
Like be able to distinguish and like, I don't know, not make it like an utter clusterfuck of like messiness, I guess. I don't know.
Right. And so lastly, the last issue we think Unfinity has is people, not necessarily myself, but people bring up like, who is the target audience for Unfinity? And people ask this genuinely. For me, I always tell them, oh, it's the ultra casual players. And sometimes they are satisfied with that answer. But people always ask, like, who's the target audience for Unfinity? Because people will talk about how monetarily silver border sets don't sell as well as black border sets. I hear that a lot. But I don't think they'd be continuing to make silver border-esque sets if they weren't profitable. Like, I know Morrow has gone to his bosses, had to really convince them, made a set. It like must have broken even at least because they kept making silver border-esque sets. And yeah, now this set is quote-unquote black border. But, you know, this set is really a like silver border in disguise. So, like, people ask this question, it's a point of contention, but like, I'm not too concerned about it.
I mean, who's the target audience? People who maybe aren't getting to play as much because there's cards they don't resonate with because, you know, they're looking for something different, is what I would say. So this allows people to, like, branch more into kind of the current world of Magic now, which I think is good. Yeah.
Yep.
So let's move on to, you know, a couple issues with Warhammer 40k. I feel like these issues, it's not so much that there's like stickers and the confused mechanics around that, or that it's like, is this legal or not? But I guess so. First example, so there are many new creature types that were introduced, like Tyranids, Necrons, because those exist in Warhammer 40k, and they were printed onto Magic cards. Now, let's say one of those cards had been extremely popular, and it's like, how do you reprint that? You can't reprint it into a standard legal set, since they are so 40k ingrained. Like, Tyranids are not something unique to Magic, and aren't just going to be found on any kind of plane. And then, the other issue, and this is a little complicated, but so if we reprint, let's say, a Tyranid, or whatever, Morrow has stated that if that card is in high demand for a reprint, then they would reprint it with a Magic name and assign it a Magic creature type, which I think just makes it all the more confusing as to, like, what is this card? Like, does it, I guess, like, you know, if a Tyranids become dragons or whatever, like, if you have Tyranid synergy, does your dragon that's, like, technically a Tyranid get the plus effect? But then you need to kind of explain, like, oh no, this is actually a Tyranid, even though it says dragon or whatever, because it was originally printed in the 40k set. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, the crossover of IPs has made it a little difficult for them to want to translate into future Magic sets.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and yeah, it's a concern that I mildly have, where it's kind of screwing up creature types that don't seem like they're Magic IP, but due to how non-Magic IPs need to be incorporated into Magic for these universes beyond-esque things, it's having to make these new creature types. And yeah, sometimes it interacts, like with your dragon example.
It kind of reminds me of when they did that Phyrexian overload of, hey, 50 of these cards are now considered a Phyrexian. Even though they aren't printed on cards, it's like...
Well, that's just errata.
It's errata, but like those cards don't exist with like Phyrexian printing on them. So the difficult part is like, you know, when you have like Cathar's Crusade, which like applies to like tribal type decks. Even though a lot of your cards that are supposed to be Phyrexian don't have Phyrexian written on them, they still get like the buffs because they are Phyrexians through the errata. And then you just kind of have to explain that, and I feel like that's a little difficult to like convey to your play group, especially if they are not as enfranchised, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it is a concern for me, but I will be honest, it's fairly low on my concern level. What do you think? I mean, it's low on my concern level because I don't think our play group is necessarily going to run into this issue, but I can see this being an issue for people who want 40k cards printed into Magic and then just play with them in their play groups. Right. Like, I do understand it from that perspective, where it might, all these 40k cards might be expensive because it's harder to reprint them, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I can understand from that perspective.
Yeah. And so the other main issue that I guess that I brought up with 40k, so these decks, which have such a high number of cards printed specifically for the decks, I think one that's going to be hard for them to swap out cards, because when cards are printed specifically for a deck, they rely on that card, and so I guess you just have to hope that those cards will get some kind of upgrade, but because all of these cards are so unique in the way that they have like 40k design in mind, these cards are going to be specifically for these decks, and then it's going to be hard to also take them out and put them into other decks, I guess. Do you have thoughts on that, or do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying. I guess, again, I'm also not too concerned about that.
That's fine, then. I mean, it is hard to say, too, because I feel like the people who just bought these decks are still playing with them as they were intended. But down the line, I could see this being an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with that, where, like, the march of time only moves forward, and I see this as an issue that could just compound with time. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Alright, do we want to be a bit more positive now and talk about the good things of each of these sets? Not just be a bunch of Debbie Downers?
Let's go for it.
Sure. So, returning to Unfinity, unsets are great for card designers. Like, you know, you work at WotC and you're trying to design all these different kinds of cards for all these different sets. But sometimes you want something new, you want something refreshing. You're like tired of designing arguably the same kinds of cards to make like standard legal sets work, and you really want a silver border where you can just go wild and you can just design the craziest shit and like just truly like flex your muscles like as a card designer, right? And it can only make you better at your job, especially when you do make like black border tournament legal cards, right? So overall, it's a net positive. And then it lets you really test out unconventional designs, and you can make all of these magic in-jokes. Like even in this latest Unfinity set, like there's tons of magic in-jokes that if you've been playing Magic for a long time, like it still is a fun time.
Yeah, I think the other nice thing is, even though some of these designs might not necessarily be black border or like oval stamp legal or playable because of rules or whatever, if you understand like why it wouldn't work in that way, maybe you can also kind of begin to theorize a way that it could work, I guess. And so that is also activating some muscles, as into, so here's an issue I had, how can I solve it? Like, Yeah. Which I feel like they've done before, too. So, unsets are always nice in that way, where it's like, you can be creative in ways that you never thought you could be, and then when you go back to kind of creating the more traditional Magic cards, you have, like, tons of new ideas or, like, ways you can experiment with as well.
Yep. We kind of talked about this earlier, but another upside would be expanding Magic's tonal range as one of WotC's goals. So WotC's meeting one of their own goals, which, like, I'm not convinced, like, making Silver Border into, like, partially tournament format legal is the best way to do that. So I'm not actually sure if this is a good thing for each set or not, but I still wanted to put it in this section because I wasn't quite sure where else to put it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, like, expanding the tonal range, like, half of these cards are still legal in Commander, Legacy, Vintage, and they offer a unique type of art style because they are a amusement park space. That's not something you're going to see on the typical Magic card, so it does kind of open it up in that kind of way, at least. But yeah,
I will also admit that another upside is, like, Silver Border cards are the best sort of spaces for the Commander format, just because, like, that's, like, where the most casual of Magic players exist, and also, like, the draft format. I feel like I've heard a lot of good things about drafting Unfinity. Has been super fun. So if Unfinity is going to succeed anywhere, it's partially in the Commander format.
Yeah, I mean, those kind of things are nice to play on special occasions, but it is kind of going back to the fact that, like, just make sure your play group is okay with it ahead of time.
Yep.
The variance of, something and maybe, like, making a more memorable moment isn't the worst because, it's going to be more unique and not always going to be the same kind of thing. Whereas, like, if you're playing in a pretty competitive group where, like, everything's pretty consistent because all the decks are pretty good, or, like, they all play out very similar, it is Silver Border adding, like, a untraditional or unanticipated.
How dare you?
Okay. I didn't know how many times I was going to say that. In order. But so the unanticipation of, like, what is to happen is going to be cool too. Yeah. So the good things about Warhammer 40k. So these precons, while they did have 42 new cards per deck, they also had a lot of nice reprints, which is good for, Magic players in general, but also players who are new to Magic through 40k can buy these decks and have some awesome cards and some very unique art that is likely to gain value over time. I think we kind of talked about that, where it's like, yeah, these cards are going to be hard to reprint in any meaningful way, so, like, they are going to, increase in value because they have this special art on them.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'll also say that in terms of their value, I will speak about their monetary value, where, I mean, I guess you could look at this as a positive or a negative. Like, these Warhammer 40k decks, they sold like hotcakes. They sold out, like, pretty much instantly. There's a very limited print run of them. There's very high demand. So I think that, at least for Wizards of the Coast, seeing them, like, they're financially incentivized to continue to make products like this in the future, where it's non-Magic IPs, as Commander decks, that they sold really well, so let's just make more. You could argue, on the other hand, like, oh, you should have printed more, so that they're actually more attainable to more people. I think at, what was it, Magic 30, like, the vendors were selling these decks at, like, the super high, like, prices, not like what they originally were sold as. Like, and I think the difference is like threefold. So in my mind, that's kind of negative, where it's just like, wow, that's a bit rough for the player base. Because now it's really hard to get access to 40k decks if you weren't some of the initial buyers, right?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, so I guess that is kind of a negative to the positive, but, you know, I guess there is nothing that is stopping WotC from just printing more of these, if there is such a high demand, but that's not my decision to make, I guess. I wish it were, because I would like people who want these decks to be able to afford them at a good price. So we've talked about this multiple times, but like expanding the tonal range, expanding the audience, that's kind of a main goal or main theme that was kind of tied between these two sets. The interesting or cool thing about the Warhammer 40k, at least, is all 4 decks have unique strategies that aren't typically found to Magic, from what I've heard. A lot of them do play into how 40k would play out for whatever kind of like sector or play style you would play. So someone who picks up so if a 40k player were to pick up a deck, it plays exactly how they would think it would play. But if a Magic player picked it up, then it's going to play unique to them, because it's not something that Magic necessarily does that you would see in a typical game of Magic, from what I've heard, at least. Which I think is cool. It almost reminds me of, like, Time Spiral, in a way. Where it's like, these cards could kind of exist in color-shifted ways, to a degree.
You think so?
I think so. Or at least that's what I've heard from a majority of the people who have played these decks and have reviewed them. I'm not a 40k player myself, I'll just say. So I can't speak to that from experience, but it's just something that I've read from the community.
So, we're kind of reaching the end here. Do we kind of want to talk about any overall big picture conclusions that we've maybe drawn from all of this, like, discussion and our own personal thoughts?
Yeah, I'll go first, but I know it's a little hard to, like, kind of take a step back and say that this product is not for me when you are just such an enfranchised player, because you kind of expect, with the amount of products, that, like, everything is going to have something for you.
Yeah, it does feel that way, doesn't it, sometimes?
It does. So both Unfinity and Warhammer, to me, are those types of products, which it took me a while to say, like, hey, you know, great for the people who actually enjoy this, but I had little interest and picked up very few cards from the sets. But that doesn't mean that I don't want WotC to never do something like this again. Mm-hmm. But going back to kind of like what we talked about in the beginning, it's just a lot all at once. So it was a little hard to like digest it at the time. But I do want them to make more products that target different audiences, because that just makes the audience grow.
Yeah. I feel like I've been on a similar journey where I have said to myself, where like, alright, I've been playing this card game for years, all these sets have been coming out, I always buy the sets, and it's only been until like Secret Layers, and then all these universes beyond, and now the Warhammer 40k, that I am kind of having like questioning whether like, oh, I actually don't want to buy every single product that WotC's making, and that's been a real adjustment for me, and it's something that I've kind of come to terms with, where it's just like, yeah, it's okay to like step back and realize this isn't what I want, and hopefully the thing that I don't want is what other people want, and it's not going to ruin the card game that I'm playing and ruin my experience playing it. I feel like you just need to be a more thoughtful and even more responsible player in that regard. But I totally want like more people to play Magic, because there's still most of my friends don't play, and if one day there's like a non-Magic IP that like is one of their other hobbies, and like I get them to start playing because of it, then that's cool too.
Yeah, we just have to recognize that everyone has different play styles, and maybe this will just open up the kind of like pre-game discussions, make sure everyone's on the same page about everything, and at least
I think that's the key, and that's also the hardest part, right? Talking and creating like similar expectations within everybody, because everyone comes in with different expectations of the game.
Yep.
Yeah,
I agree.
It's tough.
You have anything else you want to say before I outro us out?
One of the main fears between like Universes Beyond, which is part of Warhammer 40k, and future Magic IPs that are going to be incorporated, as well as Unfinity. Well, I should say especially with Unfinity. Like, I feel like one of the main fears during these last like month or two is that players are concerned that silver border is just like going to completely dissolve away, and that all designs will become black border, tournament legal, and here's all these crazy wacky designs that are all going to become tournament legal, or I should say eternal format legal, and that is just going to ruin Commander, and then it truly will die. So I think that's one of the main fears and core anxieties to a lot of this discussion, and I will say that I don't think that's ever going to fully happen, because it was always intended to like make silver border-esque cards, and like recently it just happened to be like, okay, half of them over the years, they are eternal format legal. Like, I still think there will be like acorn cards in the future, and then sure, maybe some of the set, maybe a third, maybe a half, is going to be eternal format legal, or maybe a future set is going to be 100% acorn holofoils. Who knows what the future is going to bring, but I don't think we need to worry about WotC staff just like, oh, whatever, I don't care anymore, like let's make all of the ridiculous crazy designs like eternal format legal, let's just break standard, let's break vintage, let's break legacy, let's break everything. I think that's what people are afraid of, and let's break Commander. Like, I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. I think like we're okay. Like, as much as like you can question the designers, I don't think they're gone off the deep end that much.
Yeah, and again, these were made in like supplementary products, so it's like, in these types of products you can do stuff like that. Like, I can't imagine them doing stuff like this in standard, so I feel like people's fears are I guess like I wouldn't be worried about like stuff like this showing up in standard anytime soon.
Yeah. And so I'll also add like cards like Space Bellerin. Myself and a lot of people don't like those sorts of cards. They're Commander legal. That being said, I think in the average night, in an average night of playing Commander, I don't think I'm going to see it that much. I think there is going to be some self-correction by the player base, by the Commander community, where it's only going to be seen in the ultra-casual spectrum of power levels, right? That's what I'm hoping, that's what I am expecting. I could be proven wrong in the future, and if so, I will talk about it. But for the most part, I do think that we're going to be fine, and I'm not going to have to play against Space Bellerin every other night and just like be pissed off and annoyed. And like, hopefully you're talking to your play groups before a game starts, and even if someone is playing that card, you can talk to them and realize that they're playing that, ask them to maybe play a different deck, or meet them where they're at and play your own super zany, wacky deck, and at the end of the night, everyone have fun. Yeah?
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. In terms of, like, I've kind of been talking about Silver Border, I think one final note I have is, in terms of Universes Beyond, I am still a little bit concerned about, like, X number of years in the future where, like, you're playing your Warhammer 40k cards, and you're playing your Fortnite cards, and you're playing your Stranger Things cards, and it's all just a deck that's an amalgamation of things that aren't actually Magic IP, And to some degree, I'll kind of roll my eyes. But at the same time, I could also see myself kind of appreciating, like, seeing all the different, like, styles of cards that they are. And as long as it's kind of, if it's a form of self-expression, I can appreciate that. It's a bit of a gray zone, right? I think a large part of it, honestly, is going to be like the personality of the player. If they're a cool player and like they're transparent about what they're doing, like I feel like I could talk to them and make sure that whatever they're doing, we're going to have a fun time by the end of the night. If the player is kind of like stingy about what they're doing, what they're playing, isn't transparent about their goals and expectations, then no matter what cards they're playing, I'm going to have a bad time. So I think that's really the key factor here, is how well are you communicating your pregame discussions, how well are you communicating what you're expecting from the night, what kind of power level you're playing, what kind of cards you're playing. I think that's honestly the final and ultimate decider of how you play games.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
All right.
Yeah. With that, we are the Wizard Staff. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, and anywhere else that you listen to your podcasts. You can also listen to us on YouTube. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at WizardStaff101. You can write us an email at thewizardstaff101@gmail.com if you want to bitch and complain about how stupid we are. We thank you very much for listening, and we hope you have a great night. We'll talk to you again soon. Peace.
Peace.